Ever since I was able to save up enough of my own money, I've owned Mac computers. My first ever laptop that I bought nearly 10 years ago now was a 2008 MacBook Pro. And when that died nearly 4 years later, I upgraded to a mid-2012 MacBook Pro, which lasted me all the way up until this year. For me, I love the way Apple has designed its software and its ecosystem. It's clean, it's unobtrusive, and it's easy to use. And more than that, it has this polished feeling to it. And that's something that I've often placed a high value on. And it's something that Apple has always been, in my mind, the best at. In terms of video editing, I started out with Final Cut Pro 6 and then 7, and I loved it, but then that was discontinued, and instead they released a more consumer-friendly Final Cut Pro 10, which turned away a lot of professional editors, including myself. It was at that point that I made the switch over to Adobe Premiere Pro, and it was a really seamless transition given how similar it was to Final Cut Pro 7. But then over time, as my computers aged, and given the lack of optimization of Adobe software for Apple computers, I knew it was time to start thinking about making the switch over to PC. I was actually preparing to buy a whole heap of PC parts to complete my first ever custom PC build, and I was in way over my head, so luckily MSI got in touch and they said that they would send me a build of their own in exchange for making a few videos on it. There was no hesitation from me, so I accepted, and here we are. I've now owned and used this MSI built PC for 2 months, and I've used it every single week to edit my YouTube videos on. And so this video is not only going to be my full review of this PC, but also my thoughts on whether it was worth making the switch over to PC for video editing. Should be said that even though MSI did send me the PC, they haven't paid me to say anything in particular, and I am in fact free to give you my full, honest thoughts. So with that said, let's get started. So firstly, I do want to give you a little bit of a rundown as to the internals of this MSI PC and why they matter for a video editor like me. But also, if you're interested in building your own PC, then we'll have a bit of a chat about what parts you should prioritize if you're a content creator, and what parts matter a little less if you're looking to save some money. I'll also place a link down in the notes below that will give you some more information about my system in particular. And this page will have a heap of in-depth information for you to check out. So if you are interested in building your own PC or just in finding out more about my own PC, then definitely check that link out to find out more. So starting with the CPU or the processor of a machine. Now, if you're someone who wants to edit with 4K video files, then this can have a significant impact on your machine, and the processor actually plays the most important role when it comes to handling this type of editing. Editing tools like Adobe Premiere Pro and After Effects are designed to utilize the cores of a processor, and so the more cores that a CPU has, the more calculations these pieces of software can make simultaneously, which can speed up an editing workflow big time. So my MSI setup came with the Intel i9 7900X, which is a 10-core CPU, and this is an absolute beast of a processor that helps to cut through 4K footage like it's creamy butter. It's also massively sped up my export time. So I'm now able to export a 10-minute 4K project with maximum render quality switched on, with LUTs on every clip, with warp stabilizer used at different points, and with other effects and overlay used throughout in under 10 minutes. And this is all because Premiere Pro is able to utilize all 10 of those cores, which makes it more efficient and way more powerful. Now, the Intel i9 is a phenomenally overpowered CPU that will last me many more years of 4K editing and above to come. But if you're looking to save some cash, then the Intel i7 is still a very powerful processor that will cut through 4K footage like a champ. If you are planning on editing with 4K footage, then you definitely need to get a CPU with at least 4 cores, preferably around 6 to 8 cores. So keep that in mind if you're looking at a range of different processors. So having a super powerful processor like the one that I have does have the side effect of generating a lot of heat. And so having a quality CPU cooler is essential. The one MSI sent me as a part of this setup is the Cooler Master Master Liquid 240, which is a very popular and well-known brand that combines both liquid and air cooling in the one system. And apart from being an excellent system for keeping the CPU cool, it also makes virtually no noise whatsoever, which has been amazing compared to the jet engines that were the fans inside of my MacBook Pro. But if you are building your own PC, then make sure you invest in a decent cooler. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to building a video editing PC is that the graphics card will make the biggest difference to the editing performance of said PC. And whilst it does contribute, like I said earlier, the CPU is actually going to be the key player in that aspect. In saying that, modern non-linear editing tools such as Premiere Pro and Resolve have now been designed to utilize the graphics card more and more, and some effects within Premiere Pro you can actually accelerate through the graphics card, which means you can stack effects and watch them back in real time on the timeline if you have a powerful enough graphics card. The same applies when using LUTs, which Premiere Pro will use the graphics card to help play these clips back on the timeline. But when you get to the rendering and exporting stage in particular of an edit, then this process is largely all on the CPU. So in other words, a decent graphics card will speed up timeline playback, which is really important, don't get me wrong, but it definitely won't play as big of a part when it comes to speeding up those nasty export times. MSI sent me the GTX 1080 graphics card, which is again an absolute beast of a graphics card, very much future-proofed, which is amazing. But if you're building your own PC, you wouldn't necessarily have to get something of quite this caliber to be editing with 4K footage. Once again, the key when looking for a graphics card is in the amount of cores it has. So the more cores a graphics card has, the better performance you will see in timeline playback. If you're looking to edit with 4K, probably get a graphics card with at least 1,000 cores. So the next key component to think about when building a PC is your RAM. Now, if your budget allows for it, then there's a general rule of thumb that says if you're editing with full HD footage, then you should get 16 gigabytes of RAM. And if you're editing with 4K footage, then you should look at getting 32 gigabytes of RAM. Now, this isn't necessarily going to help speed up render or export times in your editing software. And in fact, RAM doesn't really have much of an impact on these processes at all. But when you're switching between applications like Premiere Pro, After Effects, Google Chrome, Photoshop, and so forth, this requires working memory, and the amount and the speed of that working memory will play a huge part in the speed of your machine. The MSI build has 8 DDR4 memory slots, and it supports up to 128 gigabytes of RAM, which is absolutely crazy. But they sent me a more reasonable set of 4 8GB memory cards from Corsair, which equals a total of 32 gigabytes of RAM. There are quite a few options when it comes to RAM, but again, use that rule of thumb depending on whether you're going to be editing with full HD or 4K footage when you buy your own RAM. Really quickly touching on storage for a moment, the motherboard in this setup from MSI has 2 native M2 SSD slots, which means you can install 2 SSDs and have a RAID 0 setup if that's something you are interested in doing. But for most people, this is most likely overkill. The biggest advantage with going for SSD storage over traditional hard drive storage is the massive speed increase in performing day-to-day tasks such as booting up your computer, launching applications, transferring media files, and so forth. You may also see some slight improvements with timeline scrolling and with export speeds when using an SSD over a hard drive, but the difference here is minuscule compared to the difference the CPU will have on these factors. And in fact, my MSI setup came with a single Intel SSD pre-installed with the OS on it, and then a separate 1TB hard drive from Seagate for data storage, which is an ideal setup that I would recommend to just about anyone interested in building their own PC. Last but not least, the motherboard. Now, it's super important that you purchase a motherboard that is compatible with all the other parts that you've purchased. So for example, if you're getting super fast RAM memory, but your motherboard does not support those speeds, then you're not able to utilize all of the speed that RAM is providing. So this is something really important to do some research on and cross-checking when purchasing your own PC parts. Now, the setup MSI sent to me has the X299 SLI Plus motherboard, which is not only compatible with all of the above components, but also supports USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type A and Type C connection points, and it even has an option called X-Boost, which can accelerate USB transfer speeds even further, which is a pretty handy feature to have as a video editor. So with all of that out of the way, I can finally give you my honest thoughts on this PC, and it should come as no surprise that this thing has been an absolute game changer for my video editing workflow. As I mentioned in the unboxing video and at the start of this video, my MacBook Pro was and is a very outdated machine with outdated internals that can't even match the baseline MacBook Pros of today, let alone this beast of a PC from MSI. So in other words, there is no point in boring you with useless tests and specs comparisons because there is no comparison. Now, just so you're aware, I have edited several projects within Premiere Pro on much more updated iMac machines, and they have been leaps and bounds better than how my old machines would have performed. But it has become slowly more and more apparent to me that in order to maximize the efficiency of editing within Premiere Pro, it needs to be done on a PC. The software is just designed to maximize all of the hardware, whereas on a Mac, it seems to be fighting a losing battle, and it's no wonder so many Premiere Pro Mac users have switched over to Final Cut Pro 10 in the last 2 or so years. And whilst I admit that Final Cut has been optimized to work on a Mac like no other video editing software has, it still has such a funky timeline and workflow. It works, don't get me wrong, many people use it and use it well, but it does require a slight rewiring of the brain and a slightly different approach to editing compared to traditional non-linear editing platforms. And I have used it for several projects in the past, I probably will continue to do so, and there have been times where I've been very tempted to make the jump over permanently, but ultimately I've decided that for my main editing workstation, it's not for me. And if you're like me and you just need to stay with Premiere Pro, then it's time to jump off the Mac train and move to a PC. And if you've got a bit of cash saved up, then I suggest doing this sooner rather than later. For me, the amount of time I've gained back into my life as a result of switching to this PC has been phenomenal. And I have to say, I value having a life outside of video editing. I have a wife, I have brothers and sisters, I have nieces and nephews, I have friends that I want to see, and I don't want to waste my life sitting in front of a computer screen waiting for a video to finish rendering or to finish exporting. I want a video to take only as long as it takes for me to make creative decisions, not hours longer because of slow rendering and slow export times. And that's what this PC allows for. I sit down, I start editing, and everything just works. And it is such a relief not having to wait for your machine to catch up with you. As for the Windows side of switching from using Apple computers for so long, that's something I'm still adjusting to. That polish and intuitiveness is still not there compared to Mac OS, but it's not that big of a drawback, and it's certainly not big enough of a drawback to make me reconsider making the switch. It's just something that I'm gonna have to keep learning and adjusting to. Even still, given I'm mainly just using the Adobe suite on this PC, it's all very much the same as Mac OS, particularly when you introduce keyboard shortcuts, so that is a positive. So all in all, I am very happy with this machine. I could go into a lot more detail, but all you need to know is that for me, this machine is gonna mean a lot less time in front of the computer, which is something that I'm going to very much enjoy. Again, don't forget to check out the link down in the description below if you're looking for more information on the PC build MSI sent me. And also let me know if you're an Adobe Premiere Pro user on a Mac and whether or not this video made you consider making the switch to PC. Either way, that is it for this video. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll catch you later.